取りかぶってた宝の地図も確かめたのなら伝説じゃない個人的な話は誰かのバイブリズムの勝手思い過ごせばいいありったけの夢をかき集め探し物探しに行くのさポケットの恋それと You wanna be my friend We are on the girl We are
a Grand Line Reborn, a One Piece / Final Fantasy XIV podcast brought to you by Third Impact Anime. I am your host, the Warrior of Light himself, Tobias. And I'm joined by my first mate, my Nakama in Arms, Bill.
The navigator, the cook, maybe the doctor on this grand ship that is this podcast.
Well, you can multi-class. You don't have to stick to just one role. You can change over whatever we need.
That is true. There are many jobs to be withheld on the ship.
I was going to ask what role a cook is, but then I remembered that culinarian is a class in 14, so you can be a cook in the game, just like Sanji.
There is a cooking guild that I found out that you could join. I love that there seems to be a guild for almost everything in 14.
There certainly does seem to be. All right, well, this is the first real episode of this mini-series that we've got called A Grand Line Reborn. If you're wondering what this is, if you've maybe stumbled into the regular Third Impact Anime podcast feed or someone's recommended this episode to you and have no clue what these jokes are we're making, I will direct you to listen to episode 0, where we talk about who we are, why we've got this idea of this podcast to begin with, and what our respective familiarity with these franchises there. I think there was a good discussion we had, so rather than recant all that and waste even more of your time, we're going to talk about our first checkpoint, really, into these series. So while we want to in the future talk more about individual themes and characters and arcs, I think the main thing we're going to do with this podcast is just recount our respective journeys through the One Piece manga and through the critically acclaimed MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV Online, now with the free trial that Bill is playing.
Exactly. Wow. While Tobias is reading the critically acclaimed manga, a multi-seller series, One Piece, on the very affordable, very user-friendly Shonen Jump app.
Well, I don't know about user-friendly, but it certainly is. It certainly is affordable. I have little complaints with the app. It gets the job done. It certainly does, but there are little things that I wish were better. I don't think we mentioned that in the first episode, or episode 0. We talked about the free trial to FF14, but the weekly Shonen Jump, or rather just the Shonen Jump mobile app, is only $2 a month to get all this content. It's not everything that's ever been on Shonen Jump, but it is all of One Piece, for instance, as well as a ton of other series. So for $2 a month, that's nothing, man. I'll give you $2 a month to get this app.
You have a cornucopia of popular series on there, such as Claymore, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, I believe Kaguya-san Love is War is on there, and Chainsaw Man, which is getting an anime adaptation for the fall. That is also on there to read.
Exactly. So let's go ahead and talk about our sort of initial thoughts into these series. So once again, Bill is going to be playing through FF14, and I'm going to be reading One Piece. So let's talk about maybe like our first hour or the first chapter into these series. I know that when you created your character, I was a little worried that you'd be able to get into our server because of how busy the server is, but you didn't seem to have any problems whatsoever.
I think it was because I have a lot more free time. I was able to sign up at a less popular time, like it wasn't at nighttime or or during kind of peak hours. So
Yeah.
that probably helped. Also, doing this challenge not at the beginning of a new expansion probably also helped. Because
That it certainly did.
I know my brother, who also plays 14 to some extent, he's also currently a free trial user, and basically couldn't play the game when the new expansion came out a couple months ago. So
That's right.
I think I timed this well. And I joined the Leviathan server because everyone said, join Leviathan, do it, do it, do it, Bill, do it. And so
Yeah,
I did.
that's the way to go.
Because peer pressure works, kids. And it has a cool name. But yeah, I started out as a gladiator class because everyone said like that's a really good introductory class to the game, and so I decided to go with that. And I made my character a fox man, a fox boy, because hey, tail is cool, and
The
it's
Fox
fun.
Boy?
Yeah, well, that's what like our friend Andrew describes me as.
You
So,
do look like a fox, I'll give you that. But you're a Mikoti, which is a cat boy. You're a cat boy, Bill.
oh, wrong animal. I apologize. I should say ahead of time, I will get names wrong, and Tobias will correct me. So I apologize in advance when I don't remember the name of the city or the character, because even in One Piece, I will give people nicknames and just stick with the nickname and not their actual name. So if Tobias mentions a character in One Piece, I'll probably just go, "Oh, it's that nickname I named that person over." So
Right.
I will try to be better about that, but be warned.
Right. I think it's funny that you went with the Mikoti because when I first started playing, it's like, oh, okay, it's a cat boy. It's like the Mithra in FF11. It's just for those people, the weebs that like cat boys and cat girls. But as I played the game and seen more of the lore behind that race, I think they've come out better than I thought they were initially. So it's interesting to see you pick that one in particular.
I did not pick it for lure reasons. I just picked it because pompadour haircut looked cool.
Yeah, rock the pomp, man. All right, so you said you started Gladiator because that was the easiest, and I do want to say, yeah, that's kind of what my suggestion would be to people. Would be Gladiator if you want a melee guy, or Arcanist if you want a magic kind of guy. And I feel like with Gladiator, the major thing is if you're a tank, you can get into public queues like dungeon queues really quickly because not a whole lot of people want to play tank or healer. It is very easy for the people that do play tank or healer to get into these instances. And it can be more difficult than playing DPS. You are in charge of, doing tank stuff and pulling people. But once you sort of get used to that, it's really not that difficult. As long as you are, as I've told you before, spin to win with your gladiator abilities, it's really difficult for you to be exceptionally bad. I won't say you can't be bad at it because I'm sure there's a veteran player that's gonna, well, actually, you could be a bad tank. Yes, I know that. But for a beginner, once you get over that initial tank anxiety, that tank anxiety as it's been called, it's really not that bad.
I think I had more anxiety about just playing the game at first because I was just intimidated by like the hot bars and just how the gameplay actually works. But
Been there, completely understand.
so I enter into the game. I will say, from what I've heard from you, from Andrew, from Basil, the story is great. I think that intro is not good because it's a lot of like proper names and just dumps you into the lore of what's going on in the world. And as a newbie, and as someone that watches a lot of movies and TV, you can give someone a bunch of lore, they won't care you have to give them a character to attach themselves, so that way they will care. And I know that's hard to do that in MMO because you're basically the character, you're the star. But I feel like that intro is not the greatest in the world in terms of getting you invested in the story. But I did enjoy that the narrator sounded like the narrator from Soul Calibur. I was just waiting for him to say, and the soul shines brightly within the critically acclaimed Final Fantasy XIV.
On the stage of history, the crystals are set.
The dawning of a new day. So I will say from a story perspective, when I first got into it, I wasn't all that engaged because it tells you about a grand war that happened 5 years ago and basically kind of gives you like an in-story reason of why the reset happened, which makes sense, but I would have liked a more kind of like an interesting plot hook, like, oh, you're involved in like a grand mystery, or you're involved in a mysterious occurrence, or a big thing comes at you at first. I know this is an old reference at this point, but like why Skyrim works so well is just you're immediately faced with a dragon. You're like, oh my god, what's happening to the city that you're in? Oh my god! So that gets you intrigued. Whereas I think they went with the lore route with 14, and that for me wasn't the best route.
I completely agree. The story does pick up later, but the first section, A Realm Reborn, ARR, is really set up. And the sort of the mechanical reason for this, rather the practical reason for this, is they were having to remake this game, from square one, in about half the time that they really needed at minimum to make a full video game. So a lot of the stuff in this game has been recycled from the 1.0 release. Of course, all the mechanics are different. The way the game plays is different, but there's a lot of similar plot beats that have been recycled into the 2.0 release. And yeah, I agree that the calamity and the discussion of what happened 5 years ago is kind of neat, but you're just kind of there. You're just literally, when you start off, you've just like on the truck into town. You've fallen off the turnip truck, as it were, and you're just some dude that shows up in whatever city you start on.
Yeah.
I think overall, you mentioned the Skyrim and how Skyrim sort of pops you right into the story from square one. One thing I think 14 does do pretty well, interestingly enough, is that you being the character known as the Warrior of Light, it's just a generic term they use to account for whatever species, whatever gender, whatever person you're playing. They really throw you in a Mary Sue situation, which generally wouldn't be good storytelling. But I think Final Fantasy XIV does it well. It makes you feel like, yeah, sure, even if you're an unearned badass, especially at the beginning, it really connects you to the story, and you feel like you've kind of done these things that thousands of people in the real world have done before. Everyone who's played this game has done the first 10 or so levels of quests. That's nothing in particular. But because it sets you up as you specifically, and because they're voiced cutscenes, I feel like it really does get you immersed in a way that stuff like WoW, World of Warcraft, wouldn't.
I think what made me get into the game initially was this game has excellent onboarding, where it really does an excellent job going step by step of like, this is how you do an attack, this is what your inventory is, this is what this part of your job is. Like, they're very good about not overwhelming the starter player into the world. They don't just throw a bunch of mechanics at you. They slowly go through it. And I never felt overwhelmed, and I never felt confused by what they were trying to tell me.
I think, like you said, that there's a lot of stuff in the UI that can be very confusing. If you dig into your options menu, there's a lot of stuff there that you likely have no clue what it even means now at this point. There's stuff that I'm still finding that you can see information that you have access to, just by digging through your menus in certain ways. So it can be easy to lose yourself in that. But if you stick to the script and let the game teach you these things, it onboards you really well, like you said.
And I think you also get really acclimated to your starter city. I started in
Ul'dah.
Uda. Yeah. Where they kind of get you acclimated to the city and wherever you're starting. And I felt like by the time I left the city, I knew that city really well. And I knew where to go, where certain guilds were, where certain vendors are. And they kind of is a good training wheels of just like learning how to use their teleport system, how to use the map, how to get to quest objectives. Feels like it's a bigger area, but it's actually relatively small where you're not overwhelmed by like where you're not having to walk like 300 meters to get to here to there. Everything's kind of relatively close by to where you need to go back and forth.
Yeah, and I agree that the cities, both the starter cities and some of the ones you see later, they're pretty complicated, like if we're being honest. Sure, they're not like actual cities. It's not going to take you tens of minutes to walk, from one side of the city to another. But because they're a little complicated, because each city has 2 zones, it makes it feel like you're in these metropolises. Metropoli. We're going to go with metropoli. It makes you feel like you're in a metropolis, And that's something you just kind of get used to. I know that you mentioned kind of being confused and having to turn your map on all the time, like when you're in Ul'dah. And I'm right there with you, man. I had to do the same thing. I had to sort of, but you know how, when you navigate a real city, you kind of think to yourself, okay, if I'm in this district, am I in this area? I take this street, and that'll get me to the college. And once I get past the college, I can do this way or that way. It kind of made me think of that when I navigate these major cities. So I appreciate that in the main cities, even if they can be a little convoluted for newcomers.
Yeah, and I'm still trying to get my way through the map at times, because one complaint I do have about the game is they're not really great about giving you like elevation, whether a location is up or down sometimes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so some more clearer navigation I think would help to some degree. But like I said, the cities kind of help you get acclimated to kind of more intricate layouts, so that way when you get out into the wider world, you feel a bit more confident in knowing how to use the map and knowing where to go.
And a lot of that is just muscle memory. As you play, you'll learn how to get around Ul'dah. You'll learn, in the area around it, Thanalan, you'll kind of memorize where these different locations are around Thanalan. Or when they tell you to go to, Blackbrush Station, you know exactly how to get there from where you're at. Or, you can just use your teleport. It's always there as an option. So any sort of closing out your initial thoughts for that game as you started playing?
Don't go into the beginning of 14 expecting like the greatest story in the world. It's mostly, like Tobias said, a lot of setup to what's going to happen later. But I think if you're willing to kind of be okay with that and be more on board for the mechanical side and the onboarding side, then I think you'll find a really friendly game to start. And I will say the story does get more interesting as time progresses.
And I'll even add on to that, not really spoilery, but it gets a lot better later. Of course, everyone says that about whatever, but ARR is very much set up. You're learning a lot of proper nouns, like you said, some of which matter more than others, some of which show up much, much later. You don't have to know what the Alamegan refugees are as of yet, but they do show up in a bigger capacity later, for instance. By the time you get into Heavensward, I think is really when things ramp up story-wise. So let's see, what my first impressions coming into One Piece? Well, like I said, a lot of this I came into with little experiences here and there from before reading. Like, of course, I knew these characters. I know all about Luffy. I want to confirm this here because maybe I've been saying it wrong. Is it Luffy or Luffy?
Luffy. That's how I say
It's
it.
Luffy, right? Okay. I thought so, but for some reason, I think maybe it's just the person in me trying to do Japanese is trying to read it as Luffy, but that sounds silly the more I think about it. But Luffy, so like I knew Luffy, I knew Sanji, I knew Zoro, Nami, and all these characters. So it's a little bit different for me because I do have a lot more experience, at least with the characters and set dressing of One Piece, more so than you did with 14. So the beginning of One Piece honestly just didn't really change my expectations from that. To see these characters, I did like how it starts off with Luffy as a kid. The very first chapter is him growing up and knowing Shanks, red-haired Shanks, I believe is his pirate name.
Yep.
And sort of getting his experience, rather his drive to become the king of the pirates. The very first panel of the manga is when Luffy is like cutting himself in the face, like stabbed himself in the face to get his trademark scar right under his left eye. I think that was a really interesting way to start it off with a self-inflicted wound, but Luffy is a character.
That's really interesting because that's not how in the anime it starts. In the anime, it's more from Kobe's perspective, where Kobe finds that Luffy was hiding in one of the barrels that was picked up by Avita and her crew, and it's initially from Kobe's perspective, just like, who's this strange man? Who's Luffy? So that's interesting that's where the manga starts because I didn't know that.
Okay. Yeah, the first chapter is him meeting Shanks or growing up with Shanks, and then Shanks saves him from a shark attack. I think there's the mountain bandits show up, they do a fight, and then they're in the water, and a big old shark's gonna eat Luffy, but then Shanks gives up his arm, basically sacrifices his arm to save Luffy, and leaves him the hat. Says, you have to protect this hat until you see me again. So it's pretty much as I expected. Like I said, the art style is unique to One Piece. Oda has that cartoony style that everyone is used to by this point. I think it was interesting to see we already have building up these themes in One Piece. The idea of sticking to your dream and building up this determination to achieve that dream at all cost, regardless of the people that will stand in your way. I do know, just kind of seeing stuff around, that we'll see more of Shanks later, but as for where I stand now, it'll be interesting to see how he stands up as this idol that Luffy has for what an ideal pirate should be.
And yeah, I think, like you said, like his cartoony art style is similar to Tezuka and his kind of cartoony art style a bit.
Yeah.
You can see
I can see that completely, for sure.
You can see that legacy, and Oda has said like he was heavily inspired by Akira Toriyama. Like in the One Piece Color Walk, he interviews some of his contemporaries and kind of see where his art style comes from. And like it's kind of funny how they're neither both 14 or One Piece don't have the great intros in the world, but kind of as we go on, would you say that the initial start of One Piece, there's a kind of good onboarding of like who Luffy is, his personality, what is his goal?
Yeah, no, for sure, I would agree with that. I do think there's some comparisons there. I wouldn't say that One Piece, again, like you mentioned, everyone's saying that 14 had a great story, but then you notice at the beginning that it's just kind of there. It's not really something that blows you away. I mean, I think like that's kind of what One Piece does, is that everyone has mentioned how great these characters are, but the first few arcs even, I would say, are just kind of the same story. There's Luffy shows up, there's a big bad, crazy, wacky pirate that's either like a clown or something silly, and there's taking over a village, And then Luffy shows up, says, "No, this is my dream. You're not going to crush their dream." He saves the day, and he meets a new friend that joins them on the journey. So, in the first few arcs do seem a little formulaic. I will say that the last one I've read sort of broke that mold a bit. So I'm really interested to see, much like you, where it gets good, so to speak. Like, where does it go from being just an okay series to being this crazy, amazing thing that everyone loves?
For me, with the story where I've gotten so far, it's expanded to, I'm now out of the starter cities. I know a bit more about the world, and I'm now part of this group called Scions of the Seventh Dawn, where, in a very kind of generic fantasy thing of, there's a great calamity that we have to stop before it happens. So we're trying to stop the primals, which are basically like these big creatures that can wreak havoc upon the world, and so we're trying to stop them. But there's also I think they're called the Garlean, the Garlean Empire?
Garleans, yeah.
Garleans. Very Gundam-like name there.
Yeah.
Where they are they've been kind of a background antagonistic force, where a lot of other factions do not like them whatsoever. And it seems like they are trying to cause this calamity, or they are pushing for it. As someone who plays a lot of D&D, I can enjoy kind of a good, grand, epic, gotta save the world type story, and that's kind of what 14 is telling.
I would say that the overarching narrative of the first game, A Realm Reborn, is very much a generic JRPG, save the world from the evil empire setting. Like, you can dig into the specifics, and it does expand. But if you look at it like in one sentence, the elevator pitch for the first game, it's you're saving the world from the evil empire.
I would say at least one piece, while the antagonistic that Luffy comes up against and at least aren't going to blow you away, they're a bit more interesting than I would say the Empire is in 14, where I couldn't name the villain. who is the villain that's leading the charge in the base game of 14? I can't name them. They just seem to be part of a collective hive. Whereas
it's Richard Epcar, right?
Yeah, Richard. Oh yeah, I should also mention with the dub acting, there's a lot of familiar voices. Like I've heard, if you're a fan of Critical Role, like Taliesin Jaffe and Sam Riegel are in this game. Richard Epcar is also in this game. I know I've heard from Tobias and other people that the voice cast changes. I think the voice cast is fine. I'm not loving everybody, but they're getting the job done. But back to the greater point of just kind of the antagonists, they kind of just seem like very mysterious, hiding in the background. We're doing mysterious things. Ooh, look at our black robes for Organization 13. And we're doing grand planning. We're going to make our move. We're having snippy conversations between all of us because we don't like each other and because we're quippy bad guys.
It does a lot of these cutscenes, especially at the end of the dungeons, where it's like you see the black robed, they're called the Asians, but they're basically Organization 13 from Kingdom Hearts. These mysterious robed figures that are acting behind the scenes. You've got those that kind of show up. They're instigating the primals, which for those of you at home, the primals are pretty much just the summons from the older Final Fantasy games. Things like Ifrit and Titan, which Bill just fought today. So like if you're familiar with those characters from like FF7 or whatnot, you kind of know what these primals are. And, among all that, you've got the Garlean Empire, which is just the Magitech wielding bad guys that you've seen from the older FF games. FF12 has an empire, and I think it's the Arcadian Empire. FF6 has Gestalt and the evil empire there. So again, something that's very well done and very well trod in Final Fantasy.
And also in just fiction in general, from Star Wars to Gundam, like there's someone somewhere has made an evil empire for their world in a lot of sci-fi and fantasy.
Of Star Wars, I noticed the other day you kind of laughed at Biggs and Wedge showing up.
I wondered if that was a translation choice.
It's actually a joke. So all of, like almost all, well, not all of, but a lot of Final Fantasy games actually have characters called Biggs and Wedge in them.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's like it's just kind of a joke. It's like Sid. Like almost not every game, but most every Final Fantasy has a character named Sid, and they almost always have something to do with airships. They're either an airship manufacturer or they've somehow related to airships usually. But yeah, Biggs and Wedge, they're usually just sometimes they're just names, sometimes they're actual characters. There's a Biggs and Wedge in Final Fantasy VII. There's a Biggs and Wedge at the beginning of FF6, for instance. And yeah, they're usually just some sort of names thrown out there. So in FF14, they are two little airship engineers that work alongside Sid. Interestingly enough, our Will works out alongside Sid once you get to that point. But yeah, Star Wars has inspired, a lot of things have inspired things in Final Fantasy, but Star Wars is certainly a major inspiration for this series.
I will, in terms of story, I've been going through the Gladiator quest line, and I think that's been my favorite story so far. Of this female leader of the gladiators had a reputable past with a former kind of savant of the arena. They're hinted at being romantically involved with each other, but they can't because of past transgressions, and he's kind of a roguish type, and I really just kind of enjoyed that story because it was very character-centric amongst the NPCs that I met. So I think that's been my favorite story so far. And from what Tobias and Andrew have told me, that I think is really cool, is that each guild kind of has their own plot narrative that you do as you progress through the quest lines.
Yeah, every job, like you said, does have that, and they get pretty involved. Some of them are a little better than others, but I think it kind of depends on what you want out of the game. And I do think it's nice that you really have enjoyed the Gladiator one, because it continues to explore those as you play through the games as well. It's not something that's just wrapped up at this game and that's it, no more. You do actually hear more about these characters as you play the game even further.
Well, I'd be curious, because from where you're at in One Piece, you said that you've met Sanji, who is kind of the cook of Luffy's crew. But from what you're telling me, it sounds like that was kind of the turning point where things started to click for you. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. Like I said, I feel like the first few arcs do feel a little formulaic. We kind of see the same plot outline for these. But what really made these shine is we do get these moments where Luffy will stand up for these people. And not only that, he will inspire them to stand up for themselves. So, I mean, hell, you mentioned Kobe, the very first thing in the anime, and pretty much the second thing in the series, like inspiring this little kid to stand up for himself and achieve his dreams. And it's very easy when we look at something compared to other shonen series like Dragon Ball. You know, Goku is very much the same type of main character. He's kind of a goofy person. He is a really good fighter. He will win all these fights just because he's got, plot armor and because he's the good guy. But I think the thing that I like about Luffy more than Goku is that he is able to read people in a very good way. And he's able to help them achieve those dreams they have in ways that is better than just saying, go do it. He doesn't just pat them on the back and he says some really cliche phrase about, achieve your dream. He shows them that they can do that. And in that first, Vita arc with Kobe, at the end, when, in that part, Kobe's dream is he wants to join the Navy as the Marine.
The Marines.
But he's hanging out with Luffy the whole time. He's a pirate. And Marines in the Navy can't hang out with pirate people because they're criminals, of course. So at the end, when they ask him, oh, is this your friend, this pirate? He's not sure. He doesn't want to betray his friend Luffy, but he doesn't want to, not become a Marine. So he's waffling on what to do. And Luffy says, I don't know that guy. Screw that guy. And it seems like a betrayal because he just met this little kid and they become friends. But Kobe realizes what he's doing, that he's lying for the sake of helping him, in his journey. And he does stuff like that with all these characters where he doesn't really, again, just give a cliche speech, tell them to follow their hearts. He actually does something to inspire these characters. And they maintain their dream by their own will, which I think is something that really is touching. Even if the narrative itself isn't necessarily the most complex and mind-blowing, there's something simple about the way Luffy operates that is inspiring. He just has a goodness of heart. And in the world of One Piece, it seems like everyone's a pirate. There's all these islands everywhere. You're either an innocent villager who's helpless and poor, or you're a pirate. And if you're a pirate, you're either some crazy captain with a wild power, like a cannonball that you shoot out of your body, or, a clown that can just unravel your body parts, or you're just one of the crew members. And, in this very simplistic world, there's something about Luffy's morality which kind of shines through. Even as, this is a series for kids. This is a shonen series that is, again, a series for young boys. It's got to be simple, but there is something that sort of shines through the simplicity, I feel like.
I think Oda's very good at finding universal themes and things that people can relate to. Like how Zoro, let me know if you read this or not, but like with Zoro wanting to become a swordsman, it's all due to his rivalry with his childhood friend and trying to find like what happened to her because she disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Or with Usopp. Usopp is, initially we think he's just a coward, he's a scaredy cat, but he wants to be brave. He wants to be like his father, who is a pirate, and defend the people that he cares about. And I will be interested when you get to Nami's storyline later, which I won't spoil, but that also has every character has a backstory and a reason of why they're doing things, and characters leave and come back, so it feels like a living world too, and that's what I think makes it so engaging. So like you met Captain Buggy, who is it's a very comedic character. He's just a clown that has a disembodied body that can kind of move around and fires a giant cannon, but he comes back later, still as a comedic force, but can play as an important role within the story to some degree.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned the various characters and how they've evolved. I've just finished. Let's see, what was it? The Barati. I think I'm saying that, the Barati restaurant arc, where Sanji shows up, and like almost as an aside, as part of it, I think sort of to get Zoro out of the picture, they have Mihawk show up.
Mm-hmm.
And he shows up just enough just to take Zoro out of the fight, and then he leaves, which is a little convenient, I feel like. But the short few chapters that Mihawk is there, And the way he touches upon Zoro's, like you said, his dream to become the greatest swordsman. Again, that's just like, it sounds generic when I say it, but when you see it on paper, when you see Zoro as all he wants to do is live up to this dream for his, it was his, like you said, his childhood friend. He swore to be the world's greatest swordsman, and to see this happen in front of him, I would say that he is afraid. He definitely recognizes that Mihawk could kill him, and almost does kill him. But he also knows that to fulfill his dream, he can't back down. He has to, even if it means his death, do this. He has to challenge this crazy hawk-eyed swordsman, and he does, and loses. And there's this teary moment where, right when before he passes out, he tells Luffy, this is the only time I will lose. If you keep me with you, I will never lose again. And it's something that you feel that, When I say it doesn't sound great, but you feel it when you see the way that Oda's framed this. When you see the characters, they're constantly crying. It just you can feel their emotions behind everything, which I think really is what makes One Piece work for me so far.
Yeah, I think that the series has strong emotions. Like, it's not a fist of the North Star, I'm going to destroy you silently and look super manly. Like, people go through emotional trauma and go through strong events that affected their lives. Like, I don't know how far of Sanji's backstory you read with his relationship with owner Zeph, where Zeph initially was a pirate, was robbing the ship that Sanji was on. Then Sanji falls overboard. Zeph saves him. Then they get stranded on an island. They have basically one bag of food. And Zeph, they're given two bags. One bag is of food, and then Sanji thinks it's a bag of gold. And he thinks that, and Zeph says, you stay on one side of the island, I'm going to stay on the other. At first, he does that. Sanji eats the food and thinks, oh, this guy's holding out on me. He was being unfair. And then he goes back to find Zeph has eaten his leg to survive, and basically gave Sanji the remainder of the food to live as a sacrifice to him. And because of Zeph's actions, Sanji is ever indebted to Zeph as a father figure, to where they formed the restaurant together. And that's why when Don Krieg, King of the North Blue, and his crew come in and try and basically declare, I'm taking over this restaurant and your ship, Sanji was like, no, you're not taking my home away. I will fight you till I can no longer fight no more, because this is my home and this is the person that raised me, basically. And I think Sanji's story is the first story that really shows to people that the strong emotional connections and the reasoning behind why people are the way they are, and gets behind their bravado. Because when you first meet Zeph and Sanji, they're always kind of bickering about things, and Sanji's always kind of hot-headed. But behind the hot-headedness is the young man that loves Zeph and will do anything to protect him, his other chefs, and their home.
Yeah, absolutely. I really liked that arc, the Bharati arc with Sanji. In some way, because if like, I've worked in restaurants before, and sure, we're not always like throwing each other around and actually attacking each other, but there is sort of a bro-ish camaraderie that happens, that generally comes up with people who work in kitchens. And I saw a lot of that in this, the way that he and Patty and Karn and Chef Zeph interact, the way they're yelling at each other, they call each other crap geezer. I don't know how it's translated in the anime, but they sort of prefix everything they say with crap. So like the crap geezer, the crap cook, crap waiter, whatever. It's I'm pretty sure it's the Japanese just kuso with everything, which makes more sense. But it's kind of funny after a while. They use the word crap constantly, whereas the language would be much harsher in a real kitchen, for sure. But still, like it sort of bled through the way there's very much a how would you say, like almost like a performatively masculine sense of attacking each other to experience that connection in a kitchen, and that really bled through here. And to see what a bunch of these battle-hardened, sea dogs working in a kitchen and had no qualms about telling their customers what things were good and what things were bad and how stupid their opinions were. I think that really felt real to me in a way that was really interesting. I feel like that's kind of the strength in One Piece, is that a lot of these character interactions feel real, even if the stretchy gum powers and the cat claw people are very much fantasy and not real. There is something about the pathos to these characters that hits hard and really hits in each of these stories so far. I know that the next one coming up, Arlong Park, that's Nami's big story, and if it hits anywhere near as Sanji's did, I think I'm gonna really dig it.
Yeah, I feel bad because I basically talked about my feelings about Sanji's arc, but yeah, I think just the pathos of each story and the reasoning for why things are the way they are, and just the strong emotional center with One Piece, I think is what makes it great. If it didn't have that strong emotional center between characters and between reasoning of why characters are the way they are, then I don't think it would be as popular as it is today.
That's really what I'm looking forward to, because like I said, both with this and with 14, the actual narrative is kind of there. It's not amazing, not mind-blowing, but once you really get into it, and once both of these stories ramp up and you get into these characters, when events start happening, it hits harder in ways that really resonate and stick with you. So
let me ask you, just as someone who's reading the manga, how were the fights illustrated from what you've seen so far? Are they interesting? Are they just kind of generic? Like, what are the fight scenes like in the manga?
The fights haven't really blown me away. I'll say that. They're there. Oda gets his action across well enough. We do see, the various gum attacks or the chop attacks with Buggy. We do see what I guess you could call keyframes almost in an animation sense. You see the big parts of the action, the big iconic parts, but the actual individual attacks, the slashes, whatever, that's not really important, and they don't really show it. We look at Zoro, we see his attacks and his really silly three-sword style, thing. He uses his onigiri attack, which I think is a great pun. I don't know how it's translated in the anime, but his big attack, the demon slash, I think is what it translates to. It's onigiri, which is, of course, the word for a little rice cake, a rice ball. So it kind of works both ways there. But they're just kind of there, and you kind of have to fill in the gaps. And that's one thing I do want to bring up that I've noticed so far in Oda's action, is that there are several times where Oda's really good at conserving panel space. He doesn't waste a panel on something that you can assume is happening. There's times where in the next panel a character will reference something going on in the background and briefly mention it, rather than having to see it happen again on the screen, or rather on the page in a panel. We just kind of assumes that happens behind the screen. And, I don't read that much manga, all things concerned, so maybe this is something that I'm just not used to. But I really haven't seen this done in other manga series to this extent. And it really feels natural almost, in a way that it makes it seem like it's not wasting my time seeing something rehashed that I found really interesting. I can almost guarantee you, if I were watching those parts in the anime, that the anime wouldn't conserve that space the same way that the manga panels do. So that's something I've really noticed that I wanted to bring up here on the podcast because it's very, very noticeable to me.
Mm. Kind of switching gears to 14. One thing that I've really enjoyed has been kind of the social camaraderie that you brought up in episode 0. I've really enjoyed just playing the dungeons with you, with Andrew, with Basil, with Hank, my brother. It's been just a fun social experience. Just playing these dungeons together, learning about how they're different, learning what everyone's kind of been up to, and it's just a great excuse to just hang out. I think as I've gotten older, it's kind of funny where but when you were like a little kid, you would just hang out for no reason, and now as you get older, you're like, well, I'm going to this convention, let's hang out, or hey, you're playing the game, let's hang out doing dungeons together, and that's been really enjoyable. The dungeons themselves have been kind of linear at first, or the duties, whatever they're called. But I've enjoyed them for what they are. I think the boss fights are fun. Like most things, it's mostly sponges, but I like the kind of the atmosphere and just more the social aspect of doing the dungeons and also the facing the primals as well. So that's one aspect that I have enjoyed so far.
Yeah, when I started playing, I was really anxious about that. I've played multiplayer games in the past. I've played online stuff and in various formats, but I have an anxiety about being good at games. And if I'm just playing on a team by myself, like a deathmatch style game, it doesn't really bug me. But if I'm on a team and I'm expected to, be good to help other people out, if there's an option for me to disappoint somebody, I don't really like that. So another problem that I had coming into this was I had a lot of anxiety about doing these dungeons with people online. I did not want to be a liability to team members. I really just don't enjoy that at all. It bugs me, and it's something I've had to sort of get over when I play this game, because I mean, you talk about using the NPCs, but that's something they just added just a few months back. It used to be that if you wanted to fight Titan, you had to play with other people, and you kind of had to get over that anxiety of being bad. And honestly, like you mentioned, the onboarding way back, the fights are kind of pretty easily onboarded. It's really hard to really mess up Sastasha to a point of no return. It's not really that difficult. And that sort of ramp has, even myself, when I was, learning this game, ramped me into feeling confident in what I was doing. I went from being a nervous wreck the first time I queued for Sastasha to the point where I was running it several times after, just because I enjoyed the rush of playing with other people and being part of the team. And now I'm running the new content as it comes out, where I'm at the story. learning as I go and still having a blast because I'm confident that I'm playing the game well and that I'm not a liability to my team. For the most part, at least. But there's something exhilarating, I feel like, about being in those, I won't say a dangerous situation, but you're kind of there and you have to play on the fly. It's something that I don't really get a lot out of mostly being a single player gamer. That's been kind of fascinating about this game.
Now that is one difference. Is I've been lucky in that a lot of our friends are playing Final Fantasy XIV. So I've kind of, maybe it's, I don't know if it's a safety net, but I've played with you and with Basil and with our friend Andrew, where I know you guys, and so I don't feel that anxiety of playing with strangers. I've never played with strangers yet. So maybe as I get into the game further, that'll eventually happen where either people get too busy or whatnot. But but at least right now, I've either played with NPCs, which they're competent, or I played with friends. So at some point, I'll play with strangers, and we'll see how it goes. But from my brief experiences with other players in the world, there doesn't seem to be a lot of trolling. Everyone's kind of doing their own thing. Like, there doesn't seem to be a lot of just like, yo, you suck. Everyone is kind of doing their own thing and respectful of what you're doing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's not always been perfect in my experience. There are people that will maybe not outright grief you, but are in a hurry to get this done. They don't really have any tolerance for a newbie. There have been those people, but they are very few and far between in my experience. Everyone is more than happy to help you if you need help, to just go about their business. If if you don't, it's outside of really extreme circumstances. The community really hasn't been a problem at all, and everyone's been really welcoming.
Why do you think that's the case? Because in other MMOs, famously, WoW has been known to be very toxic, and most big fandoms get toxic, whether that be in movies or TV or comics or whatever. Whereas it seems to be, at least from my perspective, now this is anecdotal evidence, so that's not how it's going to be for everybody.
There's a whole episode we could do on exactly that, but I think it really boils down to, well, first of all, it boils down to the dev team. I'm not gonna say Yoshi P loves us. I'm not gonna try to have a parasocial relationship with this guy, but like, the fact of the matter is that you can tell that these people who make the game really love this community, really love this game. And sure, to a degree, you can say they just love money and they just like having a job, sure, but just the way they interact was so different than other community teams. And then again, not saying any Westerners hate their audience. I'm not going to say that Blizzard doesn't care about people who play well. I'm not going to say that, but there is a marked difference between the way the Yoshi P and team interact with the community and talk to the community, and the way that Activision Blizzard works with its fans. Like, you can't deny there's a difference there. And I think that sets a tone for people. I think another fact is that for so long, 14 was this dead game that everyone treated like a dead game that was, just nowhere near World of Warcraft in terms of popularity. It was very much a niche game that you kind of had to want to play specifically to enjoy, that fostered this community of, well, let's make sure we keep the people we get. Let's teach the newbies. Let's, act like adults. Let's, try to at least keep things lore friendly. So another thing with the names is, surely you have meme names and goofy names in the game, which has only increased exponentially after Asmon really advertised. But like, there's without even needing to RP exactly, like, there are naming conventions for these characters, and people really, even if they're not role-playing their characters specifically, they're trying to keep things in the universe to maintain the illusion of an experience for the other people involved in the game. And I think going on into the history of the game, just the fact that over the past 2 years, it has taken off in such a big way that we have now, I think they've broken WoW's active user base. So 14 is now the number one MMO, whatever metric you want to use to determine that. I think at this point, it dethroned World of Warcraft in a lot of ways. So the fact that we've gone from this dead game to this huge franchise, I think makes people proud of this game and really proud of the community they built in a way that, for whatever reason, World of Warcraft hasn't really maintained over the past, 2 decades of life.
I think, like you said, like that having a dev team that really is into their game really helps. Like I'll say, from a Hearthstone player perspective, like the dev team for that game is really in Twitter and Reddit, responding to feedback and asking and answering questions. So a dev team that's really into the game and that's really active in the community really does help. I think also, like you said, like having a steady rise and not being like an immediate hit probably also helps. And also just kind of I think setting the first example really helps, like veterans being more open, like at least from my perspective, like you and everyone has been very friendly and being like, Bill, you're doing it wrong. You got to do it this way. So I think that kind of setting the tone from veterans really helps.
Another major thing is PvP is not really the focus of this game. There are PvP modes, a few of them, and there are people that play them, and there are benefits like certain gear sets and titles that you can get from doing PvP. But WoW, that was the focus for World of Warcraft, at least back when my experience was that, as people doing duels and going into the PvP modes and getting whatever the ranking is. Like that exists here, but it is very much a PvE experience and is focused on the story that's happening. And I think that also helps in a lot of ways. It encourages those type of people that like single player games to play this game more so than the esports crowd that WoW seems to have drawn, or maybe not even now. Like I think a lot of that crowd has gone on to League of Legends immediately after. They've gone into other MOBAs now, things like Overwatch or Apex or whatever the hell they're playing now. I think that type of crowd has migrated away from MMOs in general. It kind of has taken their toxic aspects with them. And like, to be clear, like I'm not saying, again, I want to be absolutely clear. There are certainly toxic aspects in 14. There's been talked about things like toxic positivity. I don't want to sort of pat ourselves on the back too much, but there is something to be proud of, I believe, in this game and this game's community.
Alright, do you have anything else to say about One Piece or FF14, or we can wrap it up?
I can already see some parallels between these two franchises now that I've gotten pretty far in 14 and starting to make good progress in One Piece. I feel like they do things different, but there are certainly some overarching themes which are shared between the two. So I'm interested to see as you get near that, and as I finish the game, getting into Shadowbringers and Endwalker, finish it on my end. I'm really interested to see how those things progress, and I'm really interested to see how One Piece makes the transition from just being a fairly generic shonen action series into getting more involved with these characters. I know Nami's coming up. I don't even know when Chopper shows up. I know that after seeing bits and pieces of characters over the past years, that there's a bunch of other crew members that show up that I have no clue who are. So it'll be interesting to see how everybody comes together and makes a great series.
My last addendum will be, I love that everyone I know that plays 14 is at different levels. Like, you're in Shadowbringers. My brother is nearing Heavensward. I'm still in the base game. Our friend Andrew is like at the very end of the content. Like, there's not like I'm at the beginning and everyone else is at the very end of the game or up to date. Like Sarah, who has been a co-host on Third Impact, I think is now dealing with Shadowbringers. So I love that everyone is at different aspects of the game, and there's not. Well, I think one thing I wish was different about One Piece is that sometimes it feels like either you're a newbie, you're completely up to date. So kind of having the sliding scales of where everyone's at, I think is really cool, and shows that everyone goes at their own pace and everyone starts at different times, and I think that's just really neat.
Yeah, I think it says a lot that we have veterans of these games. Of course, Basil and Anna and the rest of our free company, of course, have been playing the game almost since launch for a long, long time. So we have we have true veterans on our side. But I think it says a lot that over the past 2 years, we've had people jump in, and they've all really enjoyed this game, no matter their dedication to playing. Whether you're breezing through to finish everything, whether you're taking your time, whether you're spending your money to buy a house and turn it into a little bistro for your friends, Andrew. You can find enjoyment out of all these aspects, and whether you take it fast, whether you take it slow, the fact that this is a game that we all have really enjoyed, I think, speaks to the quality overall of the experience, and that really applies to One Piece as well. It's very easy to. It was very easy for me to have ignored it for so long because it's just that series, but to see so many people stay into it and even get into it, and to see people, on Twitter, for instance, talk about starting One Piece and their own journeys of these series, it really has encouraged me to not feel left out so far. I haven't missed the train, I haven't missed the boat, as it were, the merry-go. I can start whenever, start now, and still have a great time, even though I've got to breeze through about 900 more chapters. I'm still on this boat.
Well, and I love that, at least amongst the people that I've met, and just kind of the online sentiment is just we just want you to get to start. We don't care how fast you go. We just want you to get into it. I think that's kind of the mantra. It's very similar to how people are like, we just want you to get to Final Fantasy XIV. We think it's great. You should try it. And it's the same thing with One Piece of just, we think it's great. You should try it.
Exactly. All right. Well, that seems to wrap up our first episode here as we've discussed our first segment of this series. I think at this point, you're going to be taking a break for about a month while you travel. And I'm probably going to jump into the Arlong Park arc, since I've heard so many good things about it. I'm really excited to see what has happened to Nami, because last I left her, she escaped. She stole the merry-go and all their treasure, and she's left. And she's left Luffy and Zoro and his brothers Johnny and Yosaku back on the restaurant. So now they've got to find Nami, and we'll see what happens there.
Also, just for correction, it's called The Going Merry.
Well, not in the manga.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
That's something I thought too, because I could have swore it was Going Merry, but no, in the manga, at least, I don't know. That's another thing I kind of wonder, because Zoro's name is Zolo, Zolo, in the manga as well, which I know that I've heard it Zorro, the famous Spanish swordsman. That's what I thought was the obvious inspiration for his name. So it makes me wonder. It makes me wonder if there's going to be a correction later. In the same way that 14 changes the English voice dub after ARR, I wonder if at some point they're going to be like, you know what? Let's just align it with what the anime says and change it to the Going Merry or not.
Well, you'll find out, I guess.
Yeah, certainly will. But yeah, so that's where we're at now. I think on your end, you just finished our Bray Fox long stop in ARR, and you squeaked through the Titan fight that we'll run you through a little later, so you get a better depiction of it.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I think that puts Bill in, I would say there's 2 more major sections at the end of the 2.0 release, and then you'll get through the patches, the first series of patches. So we'll talk more about those as we get to them. But as for today's episode, Again, if you have any questions or comments, we have an email address we've set up just for this miniseries. The email address is a grand line reborn, all one word, at gmail.com. Again, any sort of commentary, feel free to send us an email. We eventually would like to do some mailbag episodes, so if you have any questions for us and our experiences, maybe even you want to elucidate upon some of the topics that we've discussed on this first episode, feel free to shoot us an email and we will read them on the show at some point in the future.
I'd love to hear our listeners' experiences with One Piece or Final Fantasy XIV. So if you want to talk about your experience with either of them, please email us too. I think that'd be great to hear.
Absolutely. And if you want to interact with us on a more regular level, I'd say the easiest way would be to join our podcast Discord. So the Third Impact Anime Discord is available on our website, thirdimpactanime.com. We have a specific channel set up just for this challenge called A Grand Line Reborn. If you'd like, you can join up there. You can follow along on the screenshots and the commentary I've been making about individual pages on One Piece, or you can join up on our raids. We do dungeons and duties we run with Bill as he kind of unlocks them through the story. So feel free to join us there if you're interested in playing along and help him out on his journey throughout Eorzea.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, if you want to interact with us on social media, we individually have Twitter accounts as well. Bill, where can people find you online?
WB Foreman, FOREMAN 999, where I will probably be retweeting about Lupin the Third, Hearthstone, probably One Piece, and many of my other fandoms that I won't shut up about. So if you like those, check me out, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm also on Twitter at Reverend_Tobias. Well, Bill, and thanks for sitting through this here. We've got a first episode in the pipe. We're looking forward to many, many more. I think that both you and we're pretty much at this point dedicated to this cause, if we're being honest. I know that we set guidelines for what we're going to match for each other, but let's be honest, I think we're both going to see this through to the end.
I mean, if we do that, then I'll get a One Piece cake. And I'll get a One Piece cake and a Final Fantasy cake to celebrate our victory, because both those are very good time sinks. So we shall see. I hope exactly. So.
Yeah, I'm hoping to see this through. I'm hoping that we turn this little mini-series into a fun journey for both ourselves and our listeners. So I hope you guys out there in Audio Land really enjoy this episode and look forward to more. But until next time, till sea swallows all, set sail for One Piece.
Yahoo!